February 24th meeting of the Moscow City Council Administrative Committee agenda. And my name is Tom Lamar, and with me also from the City Council are Wayne Krause and John Weber. And acting City Supervisor today is Bill Belknap. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the February 10th minutes.
Having read the minutes, I move that we approve them.
I'll second it.
Okay, we'll approve those minutes. The second item on the agenda is the High Five Ambassador Program Award acceptance with Jen Piffner and Elisa Anderson. I don't see Elisa here.
Elisa's not here.
I guess it's Jen.
Jen can have it.
Okay, I guess it's Jen.
Well, thank you. In August of last year is when this program was announced, and it was a different type of grant application we'd done before that asked for a proposal. It didn't have a specific budget. There wasn't a specific award amount, but its goal was through the High Five Collaborative with Blue Cross of Idaho to increase healthy living, healthy eating, active living activities, primarily for kids. We put in our proposed plan, and we looked at doing different things like cooking classes at the market, a passport program to encourage kids to walk and bike to the market, different areas around town where you get a punch, and then once you get all your punches, you get a prize, kind of a thing. We were not actually, ironically, we're not a successful grant awardee in that process for one of the awards they had in mind. But they loved everything that we are doing and that we had proposed to do so much that they created 2 ambassador program spots, and we were awarded an ambassador program. As part of that, we got $30,000, so it was quite a bit different from I think the award totals ranged anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000. But they did give us $30,000 for the next 2 years and asked us to put together a modified proposal based on that amount, which we've done, and the outline of which was in your packets. A couple of things we talked about is scaling back from our original program, looking at doing a handful of cooking classes over the summer, using the market primarily, also doing a handful of activity sessions, and this would all be geared towards kids, so we're talking about heatless cooking, those kinds of things. And then also thought we could still do the passport program for travel to the market. If kids walked or biked or roller skated or scooted or however they happen to get there, we could do that program easily. And then looking at, we also worked with the University of Idaho. There's the Movement Sciences program, and they have a team of students that help us put together an outline proposal to get it submitted. So that brings us to today, where we have a proposal that's to be submitted to officially receive our $30,000. And per Elisa, like I said, we're working our process a little bit backwards since the process was a little bit different. So we're asking for a recommendation of the approval of the outline proposal and acceptance of the $30,000 grant award at this time. So, any questions? I'm happy.
Fully in favor.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea. They put some pretty good work forward. They got a good plan here, and I think anything we can do to forward better, healthy living, good idea. I'm for it.
I think it's a good idea. Obviously, I see in the proposal it talked about having an intern as a hands-on person. What about city staff involvement in it?
We did budget, I think there was about $1,500 or $2,000 about for city staff project administration, grant administration costs, which would be directly reimbursable by the grant.
But actual implementation of the program will be done by the intern?
I would say implementation and carry out of the program throughout the summer. So somebody's there managing the cooking classes every Saturday, or I think we're looking at 4 to 6 Saturdays, however many days it ends up being based on what we can fit budget-wise. But yeah.
And it looked like the budget was $15,000 a year for the next 2 years, that you had to resubmit the budget or tell them how you would change it or something.
The 2-year budget there is in place because the hard equipment costs we would do the first year and wouldn't necessarily be applicable the second year. So our goal is to, once we get everything in place the first year, perhaps add a couple more cooking classes or a few more activity sessions to kind of grow the program and test that out in the second year with the funds that we wouldn't need for equipment in the second year.
That'd be fun. I know of a person in the Viola area that does, what is it? She does solar cooking classes. So maybe that's a person who would be interested in being engaged in this. You know, you're thinking
Right.
about kids heatless cooking things. Maybe that would be something, well, that involves heat, but it's heat from the sun. Maybe it would be something that would be
Right.
integrated, so that would be interesting.
That's neat. I'll touch
perhaps.
base with you on getting
Okay.
her contact info.
Sounds good. Well, I think we're all in favor of moving this forward. Can we just put this on the consent agenda, Bill? Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the, sorry, I jumped, the reason statement of relevant criteria for appeal.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
How are you?
Good. How are you? As you are aware, on February 18th, the council heard an appeal to a denial of the Board of Adjustment for a variance request from the minimum lot width for a parcel located at 626 Kenneth Street. After they considered the matter, the council chose to overturn the board's decision approving the variance and directed staff to prepare the reason statement of relevant criteria, which is included in your packet today. So we're just looking for recommendation for approval of that draft statement.
And those 5 points. And so the process for drafting that was probably taking Dan Carscallen's comments from that meeting. I think he was the one that
Right.
articulated most clearly our position, and then you went from there and drafted that
Yep.
up. Okay. So
I've read all 5, and as I had said at the meeting, I was swayed by Dan's comments that these could be written, and they are, and you did a good job. So I support what you did. Yep.
Okay.
Recommend approval.
I'm fine with it. You
Since I voted against
voted against it, you're going to let us figure it. No, I'm teasing you.
I'm not, it was a 4-2 vote. That's the way we do things.
Yeah.
So we'll just go along with that.
I think this matches what we had
Okay.
talked about at the meeting. Okay, we'll move those on. Yep, thanks.
All right.
I
Thank
think
you.
consent will be fine. And the last regular item is, this is a record-breaking time today, the drug and alcohol policy revisions. And we had some material in our packet, and then we were, today, I believe, resent a corrected version of that.
Right. There was one typo on page 1 that was corrected, but other than that, it was essentially what you received initially. Okay. I'm Debbie Klein-Robertson, and in regards to the drug and alcohol policy revisions, I have been reviewing the entire personnel policies manual, and these 2 policies, we have 2 policies in our current manual, one that covers generally pretty much all employees, one that's more specifically geared towards commercial drivers. And what the intent of my review and revisions was to get the policies compliant with federal and other laws, as well as make them a little bit easier to understand. Also to make sure that there was consistencies between the 2 policies where there needed to be consistent applications of policies, such as a driver that would have an accident in a city vehicle, whether it's a commercial driver or a non-commercial driver, their follow-up or their post-accident drug testing would be similar rather than have a differentiation between what happens to them because of license. Essentially, the first policy that's in the manual is drugs, alcohol, drugs, narcotics, and alcohol. And I'm suggesting that perhaps it be replaced with a drug-free workplace policy, and that provides more parameters for compliance with having a drug-free workplace policy. To get federal grants and enter contracts with the federal government, they recommend or require you have a drug-free workplace policy. So the one policy is being enhanced to cover the elements that are needed for a drug-free workplace program. Essentially, it needs to, there's several elements in a drug-free workplace program which the new policy would address. There's a second policy which is entitled in its current form, drug and alcohol testing. And it's proposed to be replaced with a very long title, but in essence, it would be a drug and alcohol policy for use with the Federal Motor Carrier Administration as well as Federal DOT. And essentially what it does is provides all the references to regulations that are required under those federal regulations. And it talks about reporting of results, collecting of tests, drug and alcohol testing. It also clarifies, this policy clarifies that it is covering commercial drivers. And essentially it will be compliant with federal law in that regard. Both of these policies have been reviewed several times by staff. The draft policies have been sent to the department directors. They've also gone to the Employee Advisory Committee several times, and I went out and visited the Streets and Fleet Division to talk about the policy. And essentially, the employees seem fine with the policies. I guess the biggest topic of discussion was drug testing and why isn't everyone randomly drug tested and why don't we have pre-employment drug testing. But those were the main topics. I had anticipated other issues coming up, but typically employees don't ask why there's not more testing. They usually want to know why there's less. But they were concerned about if we're a drug-free workplace, why isn't there more testing? But essentially, those are the policies. They've also been reviewed by a company we use who conducts the selection for a random drug testing. They also provide expertise on federal DOT law. And also both policies were reviewed by our city attorney for compliance with law as well as consistency between the two policies where consistency was needed. And the action that's recommended is approval of the policies as they're written, or if you feel they need to be modified. And if you have questions, I'll entertain those.
I don't do.
Clarification
Yes.
on a couple of things.
Certainly.
On the corrected form that you sent us, Debbie, first of all, under prohibited conduct, paragraph 1, no driver shall report for duty or remain on duty requiring the performance of safety-sensitive functions while having an alcohol concentration of .02 or greater,
Right.
period. Then we go on down to other related alcohol conduct. A driver tested under the requirements of this policy who was found to have an alcohol concentration of .02 or greater but less than .04 shall be removed immediately from performing safety-sensitive functions until the start of the driver's next regular scheduled duty, and so on and so forth. My question is, greater than .02 but less than .04? Don't tell me why that. I'm not understanding what that says. That says to me that if a driver is tested under the requirements of this policy and is found to have an alcohol concentration of .06, he's fine.
Yeah,
Because it says
that's a good
greater than
point. It's almost
.02 or
should say-
less than .04.
It does seem like it should be anything over .02 is
Right.
like you're.
Rod.
Good afternoon.
You asked the right question.
Yes.
Well, on the .04, then that's a DUI. If you have a CDL.
.08 DUI.
No, on a CDL, if you blow up
Okay,
.04, that's a DUI. That's where that number
What
comes
did I
from.
even say that to him? He knows better than I do. Go ahead.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's why it's a .04. So,
But it says less than 04.
But if it's less than 04, if it's between a .02 and a .04, you don't want them doing safety-sensitive functions. They're not going to be dismissed or have discipline kicked in. They're just done for that day.
So they know that if it's .04 or greater, that's a DUI.
And that's their
Because
CDL
of their CDL.
is going to be yanked.
Okay, so that's,
So then should there be that statement in there of what happens at .04 and then higher? Because that seems to
Well, they'll
be.
lose their license, the CDL license.
It's already in there.
And that's already in there.
I
So
didn't
that's
see it in
why,
there.
I see, that's what I think, I think what Wayne's
I
question
did not
is
see
it
that
seems
in
like
there. Did I
there's
miss
a.
When you get a CDL, you are told that.
Yes.
I understand
to
that, but
apply
that's
for-
not in the policy.
But it should
and I'm-
say in the
I'm saying
policy.
should that be in
But
our
it's a
policy?
federal,
I think that's the point, is the policy do we need to state what happens at .4? Well, at .04, you're not only do you lose your CDL, but then you can't function in your job.
Or
whatever.
I understand what you're saying, John. I think that should be in our policy, that they're reminded that at .04 or higher that they automatically lose their CDL.
Well, there's a process, they have due process to go through to lose their,
Put it in the right words,
But if we had that in there, I think that would be
that way
clear.
I would not have asked that question. We would have been out of here 3 minutes earlier.
I think it seems fine. I was listening this morning to the news, and I guess in Arizona, officers are licensed to do drug testing or something like that. I don't know. That seemed, maybe I misheard what it was. But so we actually would send these samples to a lab.
Right.
And they're done in a way that works for the lab to make sure that the samples are refrigerated or transported the right way or whatever.
For a protocol, and there's a chain of evidence, and they report it to a medical review officer who confidentially notifies the city of any, negatives or positives.
Yeah, okay.
The last, the job I retired from, Odom, random drug testing, and I seem to be Mr. Random. I went down, I think, 3 times, and they always said I had plenty of drugs, so, but the process that is used is very difficult to do what you were thinking about. I mean, and it is a process that everybody has to use, all of the people that test for drugs. And what it does is it protects both the person that is being tested, and then it also protects the entity that is doing the testing. And they've got the same thing because they've got a lot of guys that have CDLs.
Well, and the split sample route seems like a good one. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm hearing that we're all fine with this. So with this one addition of what happens at
after
0.041 or 0.04 or whatever the number might be. Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. The last consent agenda, I think, if we can.
If that's going to be modified, then you want that on regular agenda?
I would say no.
I don't think we need to. I think it's, all we're asking for is clarification of what happens at that point. I don't think it needs to be reviewed again, because we all know it's going to be in there. The last item on the agenda is a report on community branding with both Jen Piffner and Gina Truschio.
Hello again. Beginning back on January 17th, an initial meeting was hosted by the Chamber, the Best Western, and the University of Idaho, I think in some regards, to present, or to let Roger Brooks from Roger Brooks International present on a community branding idea. At that meeting, we had the Chamber of Commerce. Gina Truschio was there. Melanie Zimmer, one of the Chamber's members, was there. And those two, along with Cammie McClure from the University of Idaho, have really kind of spearheaded this effort to get this community branding idea considered to see, what potential it may have in our community. Other participants included University of Idaho representatives, and that would be like the interim President Don Burnett, Chris Murray, and several people from his staff. And then from the City of Moscow, we had Mayor Lambert, Councilmember Walter Steed was there, Gary Riedner, myself, and there were several others as well in the room. Mm-hmm. So I tell you all of that because this is a project that, since that meeting that day and subsequent follow-up meetings, all of those people have continued to attend or continue to be engaged and are excited about the idea of this community branding prospect. So what we talked about at January 17th, which was then discussed at some follow-up meetings, was Mr. Brooks provided an overview of community branding and how to develop a cohesive community brand. And when we talk about brand, we're not talking about a logo, we're talking about what you're known for. He spoke specifically about how several communities may say we have a great quality of life. Any community can really say you have a great quality of life, but drilling down further into that and finding what it really is about you, your community, that you can talk about and attract people to your area with that message as well. He talked about a process that had, I think, a lot of pros and cons for us. There was a lot of doing an assessment, doing the research, public input, reviewing that public input, reporting out, to kind of get to that place where you find the one thing that makes you special, and it can't be all things that make you special. So he gave it kind of a case history of several places he's worked with that gave a really good insight into how that comes together. Since that time, we've had 2-3 meetings now where folks have continued to discuss, okay, is this something we'll want to pursue for our community? Is this something we're invested in? There's been discussion about putting together an RFP, which is the next step in the process, and I'll let Gina speak to that in a moment. Folks that are being represented there, specifically the city, the university, and the chamber, have tentatively said, well, we could perhaps contribute financially in the amount of about $10,000 to get this program started, and more information about that amount and how it could come together would be fleshed out in the scope of services with the request for proposals and things like that. And of course, any funds that would come from the city would go through the council to be approved and whatnot. So the next step is to put together that RFP in the next couple of weeks.
Next couple of days.
There you go. Which would then come back to the council, to the committee, and then council for their full review, and probably with a recommendation to look at funding the project in the amount of $10,000. And I'll let Gina speak to the RFP and her grant process and some other things that she's got as well.
Good afternoon. It's really exciting to be here. This is a very, very fun project. We have, and I don't know how many of you know this, but we are awarded a yearly grant from the Idaho Tourism Council, and it's basically the state of Idaho collects a 2% bed tax on all of the lodging in our areas, and it all goes down to the Department of Commerce. And then grantees make application for the money. And we received a $73,000 grant this year. So we're pretty excited about that to start with. But this is, in our estimation, the right time. We have the right people at the table and willing to consider developing a brand that we could use not only to bring tourists in, but also to recruit students and businesses and new people coming into our community. So it really is a great time. And so I made an amendment to our grant today. I'm crossing my fingers and holding my breath that it gets approved this afternoon. And when that occurs, we'll actually have just under half of that grant to put towards this effort. And we are, I'm in the process, so doing the RFP, and that's a request for proposals from about 8 or 9 different entities that have done these sort of branding efforts before, including Mr. Brooks and his company. But then I'm also speaking to comparable cities and chambers with universities mixed in to see who they've used and if they've done this before. And it's been a really interesting conversation thus far. The data, we are a little bit of in a moment of inventing the wheel. Very few communities have all 3 entities interested and or at the table. So this is pretty cool. And for Idaho, we would be the first one doing this. So I just am really, really optimistic about it. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
So the chamber will put in 10?
So we'll probably put in between 25 and 30.
Oh, okay. So that's when you said about half of your grant?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Yes, sir.
What's the total cost you think going to be on this then?
You know, there was a range between $65,000 and $95,000, but we've spoken with Mr. Brooks, and if we use him specifically, he's willing to kind of do a little bit of an a la carte thing where we can say, no, we don't need that community survey. What we need is this and this and this and this instead. So, and we won't pass up the surveys. Those are the good data moments. But, you know, we'll pass up some of the preliminary things that we have already done and go for something, I would think, more maybe in the range of 45 to 60. And that's a really,
that's the goal.
It's a guess, but that is the goal.
And funding levels from the city and the University of Idaho?
Are the same at $10,000 anticipated.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That was, and I like the idea. I think it's probably well past time that we need to, it's a small community still with some big entities, and if we can get all of them working together and with the input, and have, everybody's got a little skin in the game.
Yes, sir.
I think we can come up with something that will be unique to our town. I've been here so long, I still remember when Moscow was the city with a smile.
All right.
And then it
Heart of the arts now.
Heart of the
Heart of the
arts.
arts.
And all of those things, after a while, they have a shelf life.
Yes, sir.
And it's time that we come up with something, and then also include the university, and if we can get some county people, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think it was in the mid-'80s when Clarkston had billboards that said, Clarkston, the other Palm Springs.
Oh, it's bold.
Yeah, that was bold. That was,
2 people moved to Clarkston.
I think they had palm trees on their billboard.
Oh, that's funny.
Wow.
Yeah, I should have taken a picture of it at the time. So when I think of branding in the area, and I've raised this question to a few people that I've heard talking about this, and I think it should be part of the conversation, because when I think of the Palouse and branding, I think of the Palouse Knowledge Corridor as an effort to brand this area as, you know, the 2 closest state universities in the country, 2 dynamic cities engaged in activities and so forth. I think it's going to be important, as long as the Palouse Knowledge Corridor is still a brand that we want to push forward. Assuming that, then we should probably figure out how this exercise fits in with that, so that it all kind of makes sense. So, for example, if if Durham wanted to brand itself,
Sure.
they would not say, "Oh, we're now not part of the Palouse Knowledge Corridor." They would
Right.
figure out how whatever they're doing still works with the research triangle, and they're not saying TRT, the research triangle. They're not, like we say, PKC, because we're all insiders or whatever. I think we need to never say PKC again, because it's confused with KFC, and it's confused with
point.
PKP, which is the Communist Party of Poland. And I just think we need to, if we're going to be known internationally for the Palouse Knowledge Corridor, we should use the full name and not the acronym anymore. But so I think when I think of this, branding, I think it's really exciting, and then how does it fit in with other things that we do as a community, so that we're not contradicting ourselves.
Right. And I think that would be a huge part of the process, is looking
Yeah.
at all of these things.
Exactly. I
And
mean,
they don't go away,
Right.
but how do we want to enhance?
Yeah, and how does the
foundation.
conversation work so that we're picking up all these different pieces, because there are so many different, and, there's so many things to do. I mean, I was telling Jen earlier, and I just have this feeling, it seems like every night I can do something in Moscow and have 3 things to do, and, my schedule is always in conflict with itself, because there's just so much going on here, and it's an exciting place to live, and
You
we
know,
need to
start
let people
doing
know
something
about
during
that.
the day.
I know.
You do something during the day, you won't have as much to do at night.
There's stuff to do. Anyway, I think this is a really neat idea. I think we all
Great.
like to see this moving forward. I don't, figuring out the specifics are
We'll be
gonna
back with
important.
specifics.
Yeah,
As we get closer to it, definitely.
great.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's the last thing on the.
Item
Well, I
on
know
our
it's the last
agenda.
thing on the agenda, so I believe we are now adjourned.
We're done.